Band of Brothers by Stephen E. Ambrose. This book was written by Stephen E. Ambrose. During a reunion in New Orleans, he started conducting multiple interviews with former members of the Easy Company as part of a project to collect oral histories of D-Day for the National D-Day Museum that is located in New Orleans. While conducting these interviews, Ambrose became captivated by the bond the members of Easy Company had created during their time in war together. He sent his drafts of his interviews to the members of the company asking for their input. They incorporated their ideas, and he put them in later drafts. Once the book was finished, Ambrose said, "We have come as close to the true story of Easy Company as possible." The men of Easy Company came from different backgrounds and different parts of the country, but they came together in the summer of 1942, and by the late spring of 1944 they had become an elite company of airborne light infantry. Two of the main men of Camp Takawa mentioned in the book are First Lieutenant Sobel and Second Lieutenant Winters. Both of these leaders would help create the bond of these men in completely different ways. Winters encouraged the men by being a role model for them to look up to, whereas Sobel brought the men together in a bond created by hate, because he always seemed to punish them for little things and push them too far, and overall seemed more hateful than inspirational. Few of the original members of Easy made it through camp. It took 500 officer volunteers to produce the 148 who made it through, and it took 5,300 enlisted volunteers to get the 1,800 graduates. Skipping ahead to Chapter 4, it refers to the days leading up to the historic D-Day. Between May 9th to May 12th, the 101st held its first rehearsal for D-Day, which codenamed Operation Eagle. The entire 101st Division participated in this rehearsal. The rehearsal proved to be somewhat effective because it showed flaws in their system that caused nearly 500 men to suffer from broken bones, sprains, or other injuries. On June 6th at 1:10 a.m., the planes carrying Easy Company and the rest of the men that made up the 13,400 of America's finest youth passed over the coast and entered into Normandy. When entering into Normandy, they were flying into a cloud bank, which caused the V formation to break up. This cloud bank made it impossible to see where they were flying, or how high or how low they were flying. The mixture between flying too fast and too low, carrying entirely too much equipment, and using an untested technique caused the men to hit hard when they finally landed on the ground. When they hit hard, it caused bruises that last a week or more. When Easy landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, they had 139 officers and men. And by June 29, 1944, when they were pulled out of the line of duty, there was 74 officers and men present for duty. The 506th had taken the heaviest casualties of any regiment in the campaign, 983 casualties, or about 50%. On July 1st, Richard D. Winters received news of his promotion to captain. On July 10th, the company moved to Utah Beach to prepare to head to England, and on July 12th, they made it back to Southampton. Operation Market Garden. The overall purpose of this mission was to get British Second Army, with the Guards Armored Division in the van, through Holland and across the Rhine on a line. The British tanks would move north along a single road, following a carpet laid down by the American and British paratroopers, who would seize and hold the many bridges between the Start and Arnhem. Even though the mission was not successful, Ambrose stated, "To the end of his life, Eisenhower insisted that Market Garden was a risk that had to be run. Eisenhower felt that it would have been criminal for him to not have tried, considering how close they came to succeeding. Ambrose said he initially felt the same way until he conducted the study of Easy Company, because if any company would have been able to succeed in Market Garden, it would have been Easy Company. Battle of the Bulge began when Germany decided to regain control of Ardennes, splitting the British and American troops, and then advancing and reoccupying the strategic port of Antwerp and cut off supply to the Allied forces. On December 16, 1945, German soldiers made a surprise attack far greater than anyone anticipated. When Easy Company entered into Germany for the first time, it was the 5th country they would have entered into since joining the war. Everyone had their own opinion on each person from different countries they had visited, but they found that the people they liked the best were the Germans, because they could relate to them more. On April 18, 1945, all German resistance in the Ruhr Pocket came to an end, and more than 325,000 soldiers surrendered. On April 22, 1945, they were off to the Bavaria and the Alps. The purpose was to get the American troops into the Alps before the Germans could create a redoubt to attempt to continue the war. Hitler's Eagle's Nest was presumed to be the headquarters for his last stand and begin a war against the occupiers. Eisenhower was worried that Hitler would make it to the Eagle's Nest, where he would be heavily guarded and have radios to tell the Germans to continue the resistance or begin a guerrilla warfare. On April 29, 1945, the company stopped for the night in the foothills of the Alps. This was their first experience of a German work camp. Not an extermination camp, but one that was designed to produce war goods. It was described as so horrible that it's impossible to fathom the evil the people who ran the camp could possibly possess. Thousands of prisoners in striped pajamas were 3/4 starved, and hundreds of corpses that were little more than skeletons left. According to Ambrose, Winters had written, "The memory of starved, dazed men who dropped their eyes and heads when we looked at them through the chain-link fence, in the same manner that beaten, mistreated dog would cringe, leaves feelings that cannot be described and will never be forgotten. The impact of seeing those people behind that fence left me saying only to myself, now I know why I am here." On May 5, 1945, with Easy Company leading the way, the 2nd Battalion drove unopposed to Berchtesgaden and took the town without having to fire a shot. According to Ambrose, Berchtesgaden was a magnet for 2 main reasons. It was a symbolic home of Hitler's mad lust for power and the best looting possibilities in Europe. On the morning of May 8, 1945, O'Keefe and Harry Lager went looking for eggs. After receiving some champagne from a scared Italian deserter and having wine with an ex-soldier, they finally found some eggs. They returned to their apartment to celebrate the end of the war with scrambled eggs and Hitler champagne. When the American soldiers made it to Austria, there were German soldiers everywhere, about 25,000 armed soldiers in the area, whereas the 2D Battalion had less than 600. The difference in appearance between the armies was just as great as the difference in numbers. The 2D Battalion looked sloppy, unmilitary, ill-disciplined, whereas the conquered army looked sharp with impressive military appearance and obvious discipline. On June 5, 1945, at 2200 hours, the men celebrated the first anniversary of their jump into Normandy. On November 30th, 1945, the 101st was inactivated. Easy Company no longer existed.